Thank you. I'm Kambiz Homayunfer. I'm the chair of the JPEG NFT ad hoc group, and I'd like to welcome and thank everybody for their attendance and participants, especially the ones who are not in such friendly time zones as we are in Europe. We have an agenda today which is quite exciting because of three speakers who are going to share their knowledge, their skills, and their insights about the status of the NFT. So, and these are Philip Rickson from Philip Rickson Associates, who will describe a attributed, verified, and documented NFT to us. And personally, I can't wait because I like those three keywords. Then Janos is going to go through the key issues and some possible solutions of the NFT as is being either practiced or considered by the industry. And the third presenter is very exciting. It's an artist, Christoph Abell. Do I pronounce your name right, Christoph?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Christoph Abell, together with a Swiss artist who goes by the name of Number One and No One in brackets. And we have a 2-hour session, and the last part of it is going to be moderated by the JPEG convener, Turaj Ibrahimi. So I very much look forward to your participation in the question and answer sessions. And in case the cameras are off, these are our three speakers today. And I want to thank them for making the time and agreeing to be recorded, and plus sharing their slides with us later on. Just a quick reminder of what the mandate of JPEG NFT ad hoc group is. This is an exploration, and we would like to know in practical and plausible ways what JPEG standardization can do for NFTs and vice versa. And towards this, we take a bottom-up approach in terms of identifying the use case and the requirements for NFTs. Focus is obviously on digital media because of JPEG, and we focus on the areas and applications where JPEG can make a difference. And as part of this mandate, and you're witnessing it today, we interact with stakeholders, not only from academia, but also industry and end user communities. So in the future, we look forward to more participation from different stakeholders so that we can arrive at an impactful and meaningful set of interoperable standards. But right now, I don't get my hopes up too high because this is an exploration, subject to approval by the JPEG committee. And this is the second workshop that we've organized. And through these workshops, apart from brainstorming and soliciting contributions, we essentially tap into the intelligence of people in the industry and academia in order to make not only sense out of NFT, but also to solve its fundamental problems. Okay, and our work in progress will lead to a product that is essentially, is being worked on right now. And it's essentially a deliverable from the ad hoc group to both the requirements committee of JPEG and to its convener. And the quality of this work product essentially decides where JPEG NFT standardization is going to head. And just as a side note, there is a paper just published on SPIE, and this paper, especially for those who are new to our activities, this paper acts as a good, if you like, overview of the issues as as we face them right now. So if you are an SPIE member, I encourage you to download this and enjoy it. And I am myself humbly admit that I'm one of the authors here, of course, with Turaj and a few others from EPFL. I hope I didn't run over time. No, I think I'm a few minutes even early. That's pretty much how I wanted to set the stage for this exciting workshop today. And thank you again very much for your participation. I now hand it over to Philip for our first presentation, unless there are comments or questions. Yes, Turaj, any comments?
No, thank you very much. And welcome to everybody since I have the microphone. And I'm looking forward to this second exciting workshop.
Okay. Before you start, Philip, may I just respectfully ask all the participants to put their country affiliations before their names? Yeah, that is a JPEG rule. I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Of course, this doesn't apply to Christoph and to Philip because they are guests. Thank you. Philip, we're all ready for you.
Thank you very much, Cms, and thank you for the introduction. And you spoke about speakers sharing their insights. I don't want to disappoint anybody, but I have much more questions than insights. And I need to briefly tell you where those questions are coming from, which means, what am I doing? I'm basically working around copyright data, copyright metadata. So that is my field of activity. I worked around copyright metadata, sometimes as a policy engineer, so looking at the legislation and the directive of the European Commission or European Union, how it is transposed in national laws, etc., always from the point of view of the data engineer. Sometimes I'm not really a policy engineer, I'm more a system engineer, trying to build systems to facilitate the management of those copyright data. So this is my point of view. And of course, in the last few months, even in the last 3 years, 3 years ago, I've heard about NFTs. I wanted first to understand what it was, but in the last months, we had a tremendous media communication, not to say noise, around NFTs, and then the question became more and more current. It was the moment where one of the members of your working group invited me to present a use case, which I've done and which will be part of the deliverables that Cambis just described. So that's my point of view, and let's start. When you are working in copyright metadata domain, the main question for us, of course, is what's the use of a non-fungible token, and what is the relationship between non-fungible token and what we are doing, which are rights. And we start to read online or on paper, we start to read a lot of articles from scholars, jurists, dealing with that question. And it is for this workshop, I think using the summary of Rebecca Tushnet is sufficient in the sense that, as you can read, she says it's all depend. Technically, if the NFT is not explicitly transferring the copyright, there is no transfer of copyright. This question is all depends will be shown again in my little presentation about the financial aspect of NFTs. So that position, it all depends, is valid for copyright and NFT, and seems to be valid from the point of view of finance or financial instrument in NFT. This is already a first reason that I think we need to be very cautious about what are we doing with NFTs and why do we need them. So why do we need them is my second set of questions. So if you are in the domain of rights data management, we can wonder, would NFT provide data managers, so the people dealing with code and data, the engineers, the developers, would that provide a technical tool for a simpler, faster, more accurate way to handle rights management information as a data handling mechanism? And would that be less expensive? So would that bring, in a nutshell, something that we don't have now as a pure tool of data management? So that is a first question. According to my knowledge, the answer to that question still needs to be formulated. The second question that people dealing with rights management information are asking is, if we could tokenize rights management information, would that provide an incentive for rights holder to declare their rights? That could be. One of my colleagues developed a business model of a copyright data registry, where at the copyright data registry, you have 2 points of revenue. One is data entry, one is data query, so potential revenues. And it could be that by tokenizing rights management information, the one doing that, which normally would cost something, could get the money back due to the exploitation of that famous token. So again, something which can be described already today on a piece of paper, but still needs to be proven with rights holder. And the third question that we are wondering, dealing with copyright data, is, could the tokenization of rights management information facilitate the trade of rights? As you have seen in parallel, so chronologically in parallel with the emergence of NFTs, we have seen typically in the music industry a huge, new type of activity, which is trading rights, so buying music rights and selling music rights. The last one I heard of was last week about Tina Turner. So there is a trade of rights, and would NFT facilitate that trade? So those are questions we are asking. Then when you look at what we need to do, we dealing with copyright data, what we need to do with those data is very well defined, I must say. It is very well defined on the left of your slide or your screen by the law, and it is very well defined on the right of your screen by the creative industries. So in a nutshell, we must identify works, rights, and stakeholders. We must link works and rights, works and stakeholders, rights and stakeholders. We must monitor the usage of works and remuneration of rights. Why do we need to do that now? Is because now the law expects all of us to be more transparent about remuneration. Everybody understands that this has to be done in a way which is machine readable, but we must also have contracts which are human readable. That's a necessity. And we need to protect personal data, privacy, and business confidentiality. So that's what the law tells us to do with copyright data. When you look at the wishes of the creative industries, they want to have reliable, exhaustive, and up-to-date metadata. If they cannot trust them, so the tremendous question of trust, that's reliability. Exhaustive is that if you need, for example, 20 data to build up a license and you have only 17, which are perfectly okay, simply the fact that you are missing 3 makes the automation of licensing impossible. And I will not need to expand on the dynamism of metadata and the need of up-to-date metadata. Now imagine one moment that you have perfectly reliable, exhaustive, and up-to-date metadata. If they are not accessible and interoperable, it's an issue. What we want in the creative industry is that the flow of content going from the brain of the creator to the eyes or ears of the user is, which is very good, should be matched by a flow of remuneration which should be as good. So that is what we need to do with those data. And of course, relating to the question I just asked before, the question for us simply is, can NFT help us to do on one side what the law expects us to do on the left, and what the industry expects us to do on the right? A major question and interesting for this working group, which is somehow paired with the ISO JPEG and fake media working group, is that it seems to me that there is a very clear connection between checking the provenance of content for copyright reason and for authenticity reason. I will not come in the detail of this slide, which is somehow a merge between two things, a slide that you will find in the document of C2PA, but also a slide which is adapted for my use case. One little point on this is that C2PA speaks about asset metadata, and short reminder or quick reminder that when we speak about metadata in the domain of copyright, we speak surely at least from 5 types of metadata. We need to identify what is what and who is who in the connection of who did what and who owns what. We need to identify rights metadata, which include the terms and conditions to use a specific content. There are many descriptive metadata, and this is typically what you could see here, like color profile, encoding parameters, etc., would be for us description metadata. We have usage metadata linked directly with the experience and consumption of those data. And last but not least, we have what I call administrative metadata, which are metadata which are used internally to raise the trust in the 4 first categories of metadata. So from my modest point of view, I think that there is a very important relationship between the work typically of C2PA, which are mainly concerning authenticity, and the work that we need to do about copyright management. Now, this is my use case that I already had the opportunity to present in your group. And this use case was originally coming from the need of automated micro-licensing for newspaper. As you know, a newspaper received a new neighboring right by Article 15 of the new Directive on Copyright, European Directive. And if you want to exploit it precisely, accurately, there is no way else that automating micro-licensing, because the value of the license is so small that any human intervention in the licensing process would make the viability of licensing even absurd. So that is one of the reasons. The second reason is, of course, the quantity of needed micro-license. Since I discussed the first time, it was April this year, this possibility, I discovered that this question is at least as large for educational content. Educational content now means that teachers, professors are curating digital assets for one lecture of one course in one school that will be used only once, and then another teacher giving the same type of lecture in the same type of course in a same type of school in a different country will do a different configuration of the digital content to give the lecture. That, of course, would also require automated micro-licensing to pay accurately the rights holder. So I came then back to an old work of mine using expert system to configure extremely complex system. And basically, you have a knowledge engineer interviewing, let's say, a human expert, encapsulating this knowledge in a knowledge base, which can be used by an inference engine, and not a human, the non-expert, can exploit what he did not know. Very quickly, if you want to use this between machines, you need to compile that human-to-human expert system in a system-to-system tool. You can feed the system with the content, in this case, virtual reality content to teach anatomy, a licensing context, and it can produce a micro license. What if you do not have the metadata for that anatomy content? Well, you could find out the DNA of the content through content-dependent identification. We have many systems for that. If you have the DNA of that content, you can query an open rights data framework from where you will receive metadata, and again, combined with licensing context, you can produce a micro license. So that is the typical use case. Now, I come with the second set of questions. You remember the question about copyright and NFTs. Well, we have the same question or similar question when you think about financial instrument and NFTs. Here, I did not find a lot of scholarly articles on the topic, but you can already find a lot of opinion from law firms on the topic. And what you see here are three, one British one, one Japanese one, and one Indian one. When you read the document, and sometimes with interesting block diagrams from Japan, you see that the conclusion is very similar as the conclusion we had on the question, what is the relationship between NFT and copyright? In this case, what is the relationship of NFT and financial instrument? And they all conclude, it depends. So if it depends, it means, according to me, that those famous NFT, from a financial point of view, need to be documented. We need to know what is the transaction, what is the promise between a seller and a buyer. So there is a need of reducing the uncertainty and the unknown around that NFT. And this is maybe not perfectly correct, what I'm showing you on this slide, but this is our understanding about the relationship between an asset and NFT. So at the beginning, you have an asset which is scarce, and typically a virtual reality experience of anatomy is a scarce asset, which costs a lot of money to produce. And before even thinking about NFT, we need to declare that asset. That asset has to be attributed, and the attribution has to be verified. So at that moment, we have verified rights management information about the asset. Now, if we have that, when we mint the NFT, that information can be already, quote unquote, included in the NFT. As an aside here, following my two questions of the previously, we consider the NFT as a subject matter, which is a legal term in copyright law, and we consider the NFT as a derivative of the asset, which is definition from the finance world. Now, here we think that the NFT should also be declared. The NFT should be attributed, because there is not only a creator and typically a rights holder, maybe a minter needs to be known. The NFT is documented, and then we have available verified rights management information about that NFT. At that moment, the NFT can be marketed, ticking all the box of the intellectual property rights laws and ticking all the box of financial regulation, and can be then experienced on one or another device, knowing that those NFTs can have a very different experience. For some of them, you need Googles in the sense of this anatomy course. It can be a large screen, it can be a turnstile giving you access to a private gig. God knows, but that's exactly how it could work. So on that model, using this use case example of that virtual reality experience of a course of anatomy, that would be first with a content binding protocol correctly attributed. We can use verifiable credentials. The RMI for that anatomy experience can be verified. An NFT technically can be minted. The NFT could be declared, attributed, documented, stored, and then traded in experience. So that is the use case. Now that leads me, and I hope I'm still on time, I guess yes, that leads me on many more questions that please accept them from an ignorant of standardization process. So you are in a standardization process, and I wonder, first, assuming that the purpose of NFT can be established, which means they do something that we could not do before, then we need them. Looking at what I can read and the previous workshops and document from my colleagues, I wonder, I see content identification. No doubt we must be able to do that. That's a requirement. People authentication, well, that's also something we need to do. Content binding, we have seen in the C2PA work, and you can see in our work on copyright data management, content binding is something we must do. Content provenance, we need to do also, and content excuse me, authentication. Now, what about non-fungible tokens? And when you look at all of this, this is all domains, as I perceived, where standardization are, on one side, very well advanced, typically content identification, people authentication. On the other side, in progress, typically content binding, content provenance, and potentially nascent, exploring, as can be said, about non-fungible tokens. And the question of the layperson I am is, well, should that be coordinated, or are we looking at a potential standard in silos and then missing some interesting connection? So that is one question. My next question is, when you look at what people like me are doing, that means people like engineers. But then you have seen already here in this little presentation, the influence of scholars who are not engineers. They are jurists, and they can be jurists in rights, or they can be jurists in financial regulation. And then you have some, well, most of you maybe, I don't know, standardization experts who are yes or no engineers. So there is, according to me, an interdisciplinary collaboration, which probably would be, if not necessary, at least useful. And I wonder how that works. Then, as you know, please don't think that I'm too skeptical about NFT. I'm simply asking question, I think. But then I wonder if we would enter all together in one way or the other, a major effort of standardization. Are you normally, big question mark from my side, are you normally assessing the potential adoption of a new standard ex ante? Or are you exploring, even if you do not know, if there is any potential adoption of a standard around NFT? And my last question was, or is, what could we do today to make sure that if we do a standard, the standard will be perceived as useful or even maybe necessary, so that could guide the standardization process, and what has to be checked during the standardization process. So many more questions than insights, but I hope they could be useful.
Thank you very much, Philip. As usual, a very engaging and insightful presentation. Okay.
Thank you, Cms.
Yeah, and you're right on time, given our delayed start. Okay, let's move on to the next presenter. Yes, And I forgot to mention at the beginning that we had a slight rearranging. Originally, Jonas was supposed to go first, followed by Philip. But I'm glad that we did this rearrangement. Some of you might have not noticed the updated agenda. With that, over to you, Jonas. Thank you.
Thank you. Is my screen okay? My screen sharing?
Yes, Janos.
Great, thank you.
It looks fine to me.
Thank you to be here. I am excited to present our work. A brief introduction. We are building alizing and authentication tools for online content. This presentation, the contributors to this presentation, Gulzar is our head of design, Hamza is handling the infrastructure, Bill is our legal counsel, and Godfrey is the architect of our metadata and identifier framework. The next slide, usually in a presentation is an outline. So instead of the outline and to set the angles, what I am trying to show here is I show here a preview of a marketplace, what is currently in alpha phase. So this means that the focus of my presentation is solutions. I put here the numbers in the following slide. There will be references to that. Those are the issues and the problems what I will present. Now, of course, to be able to talk the solution, I have to define what are the issues. And thinking about that, how to do that, I took two angles. One of the angle I call the lack of disclosures. So what do I mean here? NFT is a crypto collectible. And as a collectible, it's a form of investment. When we are talking about investment, we anticipate to have a set of disclosure communicated to us. Look at the real estate has that, financial transaction, option trading has that, and it's missing from the NFT ecosystem. There is a terms and condition, but sometimes it's so confusing that it's hard to peel off the essence of the disclosures behind. So I picked 5 of that, what I feel should be disclosed is, and before I go through the numbers, let me point to a couple of scholarly articles on the bottom. And these are from law professors, and I intentionally picked authors from law schools and from academia because the words, the weight of their words is stronger, and is also they are under the scrutiny of the academia. So if they say something incorrect, in that case, they have a liability for that. I picked that based upon geographic locations. Also, first one is from the EU, second one from the UK, and the third one is from the US. So to provide some diversity. So what are these issues? One is content is linked to the NFT by breakable URL. And I think this leads to the crux of the problem. And let me elaborate on this a little bit more. NFTs are often compared to certificate of title or title deeds. And let me highlight the difference, which I think helps to understand these problems. When we have a certificate of title, for example, for a car, we have a VIN number. This VIN number is a verifiable reference, and that's bound to the title. It's very clearly identified that what the car is, and also that can be independently looked up. It's a persistent identifier. If you look at the title deed, the title deed has the legal description. It's again a persistent identifier. It's a verifiable reference. People can go to the county recorder and they can look it up. This type of link is missing in the NFT. How the asset is bounded to the actual token is, as I say here, it's breakable. So it's often emphasized that the NFT, when the NFT moves on the blockchain, that's immutable records. But how good it is if the asset, which is linked to it, can be changed and can be broken, the linkage. So that's to me number one issue. Number two issue is the copyrights. I put the copy in parentheses because copyrights is not covering all the rights, is not managed in this transaction. Now, from the first point, how can you manage a copyright of the asset when the binding is uncertain? Is being that said, a lot of users in the ecosystem doesn't care about copyright. Is they take this as an investment, it doesn't matter. You know, if somebody even buys a painting, a physical asset, there is no copyright coming. However, it is still as issue, there is no management for that. And linking to Philip's presentation is there are large interest to explore if the NFT could be suitable for that. The last three is relatively straightforward. How do we identify users? How do we capture evidence for ownership? And how do we authenticate the asset? Now, there is another angle to talk about what I put as blind spot. And what do I mean here? That is, managing rights is a complex effort. And I here just bring up an example. So if you take a music track, which can have multiple composer, multiple members of a band, it involves multiple collective societies, multiple streaming services, which can be geographically partitioned, and also a recording label. When that music is played one time, in that case, the monetary distribution needs to be done according to the rights. If you look at NFTs are handled on public blockchains. Let's say the most dominant is Ethereum. If you look at the specification of the token and the specification of the smart contract, and we look at how many fields can we stick in information, we don't see a way to do it. This needs to be off-chain. Now, there is a way to do it off-chain, but the assumption that everything can be handled on-chain is I think, is incorrect. And that's very often over. Number two is, even if that would be possible to do, the cost of storage is so high on public blockchain that creates a financial barrier. So I put here a reference that 1 kilobyte storage of data is around $15. And of course, that varies to a large degree on the market demand. But in that neighborhood, and that simply this complex data we couldn't handle to put on chain. So this was about the issues. So before I jump to the solution, I would like to show our tools, what we are using to verify content and rights. Now, these are creating verifiable references. And besides that, these are also accessible to public and they are interoperable. So the first thing what I have is the ledger. So every time is when an asset is uploaded to the system, this information goes to the ledger. What you see here is the information what I would like to convey is probably 3 bullets here. There's quite a bit of data transfer. There is, you see here these blue lines, which are hyperlinks. And these hyperlinks are connection to other objects within the ledger. So you see there three of these connections. One of them is for the party, which is the creator. The other one is for the rights. And the third one is to an archive. What is that archive? So let's get to the next, which is a part of our tool set, is the archive is in a work format. What is a work? Is an ISO standard. And these type of formats are powering the internet archives in multiple countries. It is recognized by most of national libraries. It can be used as legal deposits in many countries, which are required in the copyright law. It has an established legal precedence and case law. So if I look at in the US, it is very commonly practiced that the Internet Archive provides an affidavit to the court and that's introduced into evidence. It can preserve the animation and scripts from the HTML pages. So if there is a JavaScript animation, that preserves that. So the old Internet archives were missing that. This technology is evolved and it fully preserves how the page is presented in a browser. It also preserves the embedded metadata. So if we are thinking about how to generate an evidence that an asset used to belong to someone, if we have the ledger record, and after that we put it in an archive, including the asset, and the archive has also the embedded metadata, is feel that is technology-wise is probably the most what we can do. There are, of course, file size issues. So if there is a long video in high resolution format, that requires a lot of storage. And that's an issue to be solved. Being that said, in the majority of the NFT, for the majority of the NFT, that's not an issue. Because if you look at the marketplaces, those are typically short videos. Those are not a problem. And also for the JPEG formats, I think is the majority of the asset under consideration can be managed. There is one more bullet here there is a Memento framework format where this archive can communicate with each other and they can do to query to each other. Our implementation is compliant with that. Now, I put there that is verifiable reference to and from the ledger. So I showed that from the ledger, we have the entry. So how would this work from the asset, from the archive to the ledger? Now, what I show here is the embedded metadata. In what you see here in many of the lines, you see this the URL format of the identifier or the URL representation of the identifiers. These are links back to the ledger. So that's who is the copyright owner, who is the image creator, the image registry entry items are all there. So these are the three main tools. These are the means what we utilize for verifying the content and the rights. So let's cut to the solutions. What was issue one? Issue one was the breakable URL. So how do we fix it? Well, make it non-breakable. Is the two type of, so we create identifiers. One of them is a common thing, is a hash, a SHA-256. And we have that in the asset as embedded, archived, and we have that also in the ledger. So I use the term that verifiable reference. This creates a verifiable reference in multiple instances. More importantly, we have a persistent identifier. The persistent identifier is something similar than what I described, the VIN number or the legal description, but it applies to the asset. It applies to the digital content. So we have these two identifiers, what we use for content binding. Now, I put up the three instances. We have that in the embedded metadata, we have it in the ledger, and we have in the archive. The embedded metadata of the archive. So what is number two is the rights management in NFT transaction. That's what Philip discussed in details, the concerns, the issues, the desire for those. So what do we do? The first thing, the rights, I showed that in the ledger, we have a link to another object from the creation to the rights. I use here often that programmatically registered, because when the asset gets uploaded to the marketplace, is from the profile of the user and from a couple of fields, it's automatically generated. The user even doesn't need to click additional button on it, it's automatically created. So, and this has the usage rights, also what is Philip mentioned about, it has the times when the rights is applicable, and all the relevant information we believe which is necessary to provide a chain in the rights transactions and rights transfers. I would like to point it out in the other slides, it was not visible, these blocks, which are repeating in our ledger. So we have here identifier, we have links, we have annotation, we have categories, we have times and quantities. And these are always showing up in this group. And please keep that in mind. I will touch upon that later on. So the next thing is the actual license. As Philip mentioned, the license needs to be both programmatic and human readable. So we create a human readable license, which is really an actual contract. You see, it's electronically signed. It has the reference for the creation, in other words, the content or the asset. And we have the licensor and licensee. And here that's cut off. I didn't show the full length of the license, but it's drafted by an attorney. That's a legally binding license. And this is programmatically executed. So when somebody want to buy an asset, it gets a pop-up, please identify yourself. Here is the license offer, please read that, click on it. And after one click the license and make the payment, this gets executed. Now, some of the terms of the license, which are the right categories, broken down by right type, purpose, constraint type, right status, those are programmatic. So those are either selected by the type of the license, or those could be user definable. So whatever is picked for the actual license, that gets programmatically executed. And I show this from the home page or for the checkout page of the asset, is to show this is disclosed to the user. Now, when the transaction is completed, in that case, the license rights gets recorded in the ledger. And I highlighted here the area, those are matching, which is disclosed to the potential buyer. The actual license metadata gets also recorded. And of course, the terms of the license, those are private. but the condition of the license that gets recorded. And I'm just flipping these slides over. If you have any question, please take a note of it, and I will address later on the presentation or later on in the discussion section. Next issue was identifying the users, or actually the issue was that is in the marketplace is typically there are no third-party verifications, no independent verifications. So what we do is currently we practice ISNI, and why ISNI is not only because it's an ISO standard, but it's also is the most commonly used identifiers in the creative commercial ecosystem. So if somebody, a lot of collective society requires to have ISIN, is actually some of the collective societies are issuing ISIN. So here is an example that is again, the ledger is accepting these different identifiers and keeping a track of it. Besides those, there are a couple of other credentials are in the works, like W3C verifiable credentials, X509 credentials, and those are being worked on. Next issue, the providence, so to provide any kind of evidence for the ownership. And our preferred method is to use an XO 509 certificate, and with that certificate, sign an assertion. The financial issue with that is those type of signing certificates could be expensive. It's an issue some of the jurisdiction, but some of the other one absolutely has no problem. So for example, several European countries, they are issuing XO 509 certificates to all the citizens free of charge. If it's not available, in that case, we do something which is called a click wrap, and the actual user clicks on it that yes, I am the owner, or I am the creator and owner of this asset. It's again, keep in mind that this works only if we also verify the user by identifiers issued independently. Last one is the authentication of the content. And this is a little bit tricky, even to define it. You know, that's why I put up two references. What does the Common English say? What the law says. When we talk about digital asset or any kind of digital content, the problem is that modification, transformation, edits happens very frequently. And how do we apply the authentication? When can we say that a content is authentic? So without getting to a rabbit hole in that subject, I put it there. What do we consider authentication in our system today? So we take a statement from a verified actor, we cryptographically bind it to the content, and after we allot persistent identifier to it, that bonded statement with the identifier gets digitally signed, it gets recorded into an asset, and we sync that to the metadata. That's how we authenticate it. And that's today that's subject to change while we are working on this. Now, I went through the 5 points. I had also the blind spot issues, and I had 2 issues there. So I would like to show what do we do for it. How do we handle those complex scenarios, like I described, for example, a music track. And under the hood, we have an interoperable metadata and identifier framework. And this one is for the LCC framework, and I provided reference below. Godfrey Rust, who is a contributor in this presentation, he's an architect behind it. Now, does it solve the problem? This framework is actually used by DDEX, Digital Data Exchange, which is an international standard for the music industry. So yes, it solves that problem, but I raised at the beginning. The next item is what is the ledger and identifier technology. So I mentioned that due to the limitation of the public blockchains needs to be off-chain, the management of this data. So what do we do for that? We use what's called the digital object architecture. It's a comprehensive identifier, resolution, repository, and registry system. What sets this apart from other ledger? That is structured such that metadata management made very easy. It's automatically a lots identifiers also. It's able to take payloads. Currently, it's powering one of the largest content registry network today, which is DOI. It has over 200 million entries. If you are familiar with scholarly publications, you see it all over, the DOI number. That's the same architecture what we are using. About the identifiers, it provides persistent identifiers, which are managed by handle.net. And this is used in major commercial ledgers. So ISBN 13 is using it, DOI is using it, EIDR, which is the entertainment industry registry, those for broadcast movies and so on, using that. It supports hashing and object linking and can opt consensus engine. It can be federated. And I would like to touch upon briefly on this, because I think that's an important thing to mention. So, and some of you may know this very well. So the difference between a distributed and a federated ledger. In the distributed ledger, what people worry about, no matter where the data is coming from, it's going to be evenly distributed, filter all the text and so on. But there is no difference between the nodes. In a federated ledger, the nodes can be different. That's the definition of the federation. So let me bring up two examples for it. So for example, if you take the ecosystem, the NFT ecosystem, the marketplaces in a larger degree adversaries because they are competing with each other. But they have a common interest. And the common interest to avoid fraudulent entries, unauthorized usage, scams, and so on. So if they agree on a communication between them, they can do queries from each other to check for duplicates, to check for hashes, and so on. So that's one application. And the only way to do it is if the instance at one of the marketplace is a member, but can apply different rules than the federation. And other application for that is like what Philip mentioned in, let's say, on copyright initiatives. If, let's say, one of the country or one of the union, let's say the European Union, want to put an infrastructure in place. They are members, the countries have different law, they have their own law. So there was, the nodes needs to be compliant with those, and those are separate rules, and after the federation has another rules. So that's very doable with this system. We currently have clusters in Austin, Hillsborough, Montreal, and in Strasbourg. And to be able to demonstrate that is the European cluster is separated from the American clusters. It is an open source tool. I provided the link and that's available. And I would like to point here also to a scholarly article which describes, which gives an in-depth description about this architecture. And let me point out that one of the authors is Dr. Khan. And Dr. Khan is the co-inventor of TCP/IP. TCP/IP is which today powers the network communication on the internet between computers. One more thing, and that's on technical presentation, it's sometimes people ask, okay, what is the one more thing? So the one more thing for us in this presentation, if you saw on the beginning of on the checkout page in the payments, we had something. So we had IRP. What does it stand for? IRP stands for Interledger Protocol. And this is a neutral protocol to facilitate both fiat or traditional currencies and cryptocurrencies. So the transaction can be done between the different measures. It's inspired by TCP/IP. What I mean there, that is the values are going through by formulating packets. It's very well suited for peer-to-peer monetary transfers. And the cost of the transfer is less, in some cases, significantly less than legacy payment system. Some background is created by Ripple, and it's another open source tool. What's left out? Left out here means that we are working on it but didn't present, is content fingerprinting and lookup service. If you actually go back on some of those registry data, you will see a number ISCC. On the embedded data, you also see that we record content-based identifiers. Digital watermarking and web crawling service, we do have a connector with Imatag, which can do digital fingerprinting, and we can initiate the crawling service through their system. We have a CMS integration. All of these features are accessible through a WordPress plugin. I didn't talk about the delivery methods. Besides the public and private download, we can do direct peer-to-peer CMS delivery. So that means when it gets, the user gets verified, this just shows up in the admin pages of the CMS, the content which got licensed with all license information, transaction, audit trails, and so on. The last one is the C2p integration. And we really wanted to show here something in this presentation, but it's just simply too early. We are not at the point that we could show that. We are a very active member of C2PA. And maybe this is a good opportunity to point out, okay, so why is it in the early phase? The public draft was released in September 1. So please go to the c2pa.org page. We would love to hear feedback on it. We are an active contributing member of C2PA. If you have any question, please feel free to reach out and would be happy to take those inputs. So what's next? Of course, C2p integration is our top list. Collective feedback from academia and from potential users. Besides the business part of it, we really would like to hear from academia. We would like to build a system which is compliant with rights transaction, with the law behind the rights transactions, and so that's a high priority for us. We plan to publish a case study. When exactly, ultimately, we would like to do that when the C2p integration is done or demonstratable. We are working on federating the ledger. It's currently running in a distributed mode. On the payment system, I threw in a word, Rafiki, what is that? It's IRP has been evolved, and there is an API framework is being generated, which will be available around the end of the year in a testnet. So we are planning to integrate it. Of course, so we want to be in a private beta and get to a public beta. I would like to acknowledge the team at CNRI. CNRI is the creator and the developer of the digital object architecture. And I would like to thank for your attention.
Thank you, Janos. You have a most interesting way of going 15 minutes over time, and it's really appreciated
I'm
by
sorry
everyone. Yeah. No, thank you for the level of detail and the attention that you paid to hidden issues and blind spots. Yeah, I got plenty of them, so I really appreciate it personally. Okay. And now I think it's time to move on to Christoph Abell, who's been patiently waiting for his session. Okay, go ahead, please, Christoph.
Okay, here we go. Let me just get that into full screen mode. Boom. Can you see that okay? Good. Okay, so hi, thank you very much for inviting us here. Thanks to Touraj specifically, whom we met actually at an art show that we co-organized, and where we have this this use case from, and Touraj was actually the one who got us, got noticed this use case as an interesting one, perhaps for you. So here it is. I want to just present that real quick. I only have a couple of slides, so we can probably make up some time. But I would like to show you the use case real quick, and then a couple of issues that we actually face in the NFT space and how we want to deal with them. So the use case is from an artist called Number One / No One, who has shown the artwork together with us, and we have actually provided the tokenization service for this very simply. We didn't do any particularly complicated setup, but we have created an NFT that, in this case, comprises 3 dimensions in or 3, let's say, 3 areas of art. It comprises the actual physical artwork, so a right to delivery of the physical artwork. Then there is a derivative of that physical artwork by the artist, namely a 2D motion, an MP4 file. In fact, that's an animated version of the artwork, if you will. And there is a 3D Web3 metaverse art piece that will happen in the future, will be created by the artist in the future. And so what the NFT does, and so this is probably as complex as it gets for how to actually incorporate all of these things into an NFT. It doesn't just give you a right to the physical and the digital, but also it is a kind of an option or a future contract to an piece of art that will exist in the future, and you get access to it. So in a way, this resembles in financial terms, this resembles a future contract, right? You get to own something in the future that doesn't necessarily exist now. But you have this contract, so it's clearly a contractual relationship that you enter by purchasing this NFT, and it goes across those dimensions. So I think for your discussion, I think it might be interesting to dissect that a little bit and see what the different components are, and also what this means for the persistence of the underlying assets, specifically also the digital ones and the ones that haven't been created yet. So what are the specifications that we need to put in there, and so on and so forth. So I think that's kind of what Touraj was interested in and fascinated by, and so this is why we bring this on board here. And we will have actually the artist himself will present quickly what he has created, and we'll do that right after my slides. So if you'll see actually you get a taste of what it looks like. So like I said, the NFT gives you a right. It represents in a certain way legal ownership / a license, depending on, in this case it is a right to delivery and a license to use in a certain way this work. And this is also created, and this is particularly maybe interesting also for the discussion here, that there actually is a Swiss legal framework for this kind of thing, and and those in Switzerland who are in Switzerland will know this, that the Swiss distributed ledger legislation is actually in fact in force since February and August this year. And what it does in very short terms, it updates the existing legal framework for contractual relationships to include now, or to make equivalent to paper contracts, contracts that are registered on a distributed ledger, such as transported by an NFT. So in this way, we are able to actually put those kinds of contracts on the blockchain and have them to be legally enforceable in Swiss courts. So that kind of changes the game, of course, for these kinds of licenses or ownership contracts that we can put out there and then have some legal certainty, or pretty good legal certainty around this. And in Switzerland right now, there's a whole industry starting really around this, specifically also in the of course the crypto asset space for the banks and financial institutions, both in the centralized and then specifically also for the decentralized financial systems. So here's a couple of challenges that we have currently, I think, and that we need to address in the NFT space. So, and I think some of them have been mentioned in some form or the other by the previous speakers. So the question, of course, for identity attribution and incorporation of that identity into the metadata or in NFTs. So how can we bring those things in, and how can we connect that to forms of identity, that's whether it's centralized identity service libraries or also self-sovereign identity in a more decentralized universe. The question, of course, then how to integrate digital twin metadata and how to do that in the best way. Here, what's important here, why is this so important? This is super important because in a contract, if you incorporate a legal contract, of course, the subject of the contract needs to be specified very clearly. And let's say you have the license to let's say project a movie, and that license is conveyed to an NFT. Then you have to very clearly specify which movie we're talking about, and you can describe it in words, but in this case, if it's a digital asset, you will have to do better than that. So for digital assets, you can use a number of digital means. However, when it comes to physical assets, you will have to do quite a bit of acrobatics depending on what the underlying asset actually is and how valuable it is, right? So maybe one dimension that we haven't really talked about is also like what is actually efficient to do, right? What is necessary, right? Do we overshoot the goal sometimes, perhaps with how precise we are, and what's the relationship between the value of the underlying asset and the effort we expend on making sure that this is correct. So I mean, the analogy would be in regular art. How much do you secure your work of art? If it's $5,000, maybe a simple lock would be enough, a locked door. But if it's 50 million, you'll take more precautions, obviously. And I think this applies also to digital work. And I think it's important to make sure that we have a correct correlation there. Then how do you integrate dynamic data? So NFTs and digital decentralized applications are capable of ingesting data and also acting upon that. So there is that dimension as well that should be looked at. So there's not necessarily, we don't necessarily always deal with a static object, but also something that can evolve. Of course, what are the legal rights in NFT? So this is clearly a legal question here, and we're like I said, in Switzerland, quite advanced on this, and there's already a body of work there, and it's interesting to look at this in the sense that it is a principles-based legislation. So basically, they didn't really invent new language per se, but actually updated the existing framework to incorporate this. So that's an interesting way of doing it, or like I guess a sustainable way in many ways, because you don't have to invent or come up with the whole ontology from scratch, and in order to describe a new phenomenon, but you try to update what's already there. What we see a lot of times in our practice is, of course, and that's been mentioned as well by previous speakers, what's the token classification? So what does it mean? Is it derivative? Is it a security token? Is it a utility token? Depending on how it's used for, in let's say, fractional ownership, other forms of tokenization. Really, the question is what's the intent and what's the actual effect that this token has, this NFT has. So how is it regulated in each case? And that's one of the most important things to make sure we have clarified before going into any larger projects. Then I think what's really important as well for us, and it's also been mentioned, what are the repositories for any digital twin that we create of physical work, but also what's for the underlying asset in terms of digital assets. And here the question really is also is this asset, will it be available in 5, 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 years? And in some use cases this may not be necessary, but in some use cases it will be. It's crucial. So I think that's another question. So the whole idea of long-term digital repositories and data preservation and also upkeep of data is absolutely important here, and it's not being talked about much in general. And I think that's kind of one of your core missions potentially, where you could really do some great work there, I think. Here's the long-term preservation. I have it here. Then devaluation is another question that we come across very much, which is the question, what is this stuff worth, right? And where does devaluation actually happen? And a common answer is, well, the market will take care of it. But what blockchain technology is good at is transporting value and trust, but it's not great at creating it per se. So the devaluation has to kind of happen outside. A lot of times it's going to be off-chain, and what kind of mechanisms are we actually employing there? Then one big and important piece is cybersecurity, post-quantum encryption. Also the question here, what are the attack vectors in blockchain technology and for smart contracts / NFTs? And there are quite a lot of those. So in any future, or let's say sustainable approach to NFTs that are keep their value, preserve their value over many years, this has to be addressed as well, both on the level of the actual smart contract, but also on the level of the underlying blockchain, and of course the asset itself and the asset repository. And then as last point here as well, regulatory things, anti-money laundering and this should be CTF, counterterrorism financing compliance, that needs to be built into the actual NFT, into the actual token, so that forward-looking compliance is possible. Meaning, what does it mean? It means that if somebody acquires let's say, a license to a music license, for instance, or any other asset that can generate returns, and this is acquired by a party that is not entitled to financial transactions, for instance, or it's used for negative purposes, then there needs to be some way of interacting with this token to make it compliant, or to mark it, to taint it in some way, in order to ensure this compliance. Again, this comes back to the actual NFT, the actual token, the rights it represents, to be to retain its value, because of course, obviously, an incident in this area could lead to immediate loss of value, depending on the circumstances. So that's a little bit the things that we're dealing with, and currently we are working to set up a group, a consortium, where we want to actually standardize this, or create a standard together with a bunch of partners who work across different disciplines there, with the idea, this is particularly geared towards the financial system. So in a sense, the number one use case being, you know, thinking about, okay, how can we make token NFTs good enough for the financial system, good enough for decentralized or centralized finance, so that it, you know, technically they could serve, or practically they could serve as collateral for loans, for instance, right? So this is what would be interesting for this space, and we believe this is fundamental. So having a solid standard, or at least something that improves over what we have currently, that will be fundamental to the further development of the crypto asset economy in our analysis. So yeah, that's the input that I want to bring here, just to keep it quite short. And maybe I can ask my esteemed artist colleague, No One, or Number One, to share his screen and show us a little bit what the actual use case looks like from a very practical perspective. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let you go forward.
I will just share maybe. Okay. Hello, everybody. First, thanks to Raj and to Christoph to invite me to this conversation. I may be far away from the technicity and the good technical conversation you're having, but I'm pleased to represent at least a use case and the art perspective and what is at stake from art perception in this future next generation image construction. So glad to present this. First of all, this is a JPEG image, so I'm glad to present that. So from an artist perspective, there are two main points that we are interested in. The first one is to share, and the second one is to protect. So this is our concerns. This is the concern we're having every day, and that we are struggling when we're getting to share our image, or where we are developing motion or digital or movie artwork and starting to sharing it. So that's what may be interesting in this NFT move, to be able to identify and authentify the source, to have the traceability of the exchange. And what we are looking for also is to find a technical way, or to benefit from a technical way, to still always be able to identify where is the original when you have 1,000 copies. So if I come to my individual case, what I do is I do a painting, large scale painting, mainly with spray and water, mainly representing melting mountains, and also with the purpose of creating that with a spray that makes the mountain disappear. And what I've been working on is on those paintings, and also on the motion work that I can show you now also. So there is a painting, and there is, let's say, an enhanced digital mirror that is the motion of this painting. And so we organized recently. I organized an exhibition presenting the physical painting, presenting the motion, and I work with Chris to present an NFT that would embed the physical painting, the motion version, but also a right for the future for when the 3D version of the painting would have been developed. The idea was to offer from a real painting the possibility to jump into the painting and to access and to access a 3D a 3D version, like the real painting is a gate to enter the 3D environment. So yeah, so basically jumping into that and then accessing a 3D metaverse environment. So the case wanted to share today, and I really submit that as a user. My main preoccupation is, as I said, to share and protect, and to have, let's say, a format that will allow me to embed those 3 versions, so a physical, a motion, and an option. And tomorrow, a physical, a motion, and a 3D art piece within one format that would bring traceability, and that would bring also authenticity of the first production. So yeah, today that's my need, and I hope you're gonna bring a solution to that.
Thank you. Big thanks to Christoph and to Number One for a delightful presentation. And I think if there are no comments from the co-chair or from Turaj, we are ready to go towards a question and discussion session. Turaj?
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks to the speakers and from different horizons. We have been discussing the problem or challenges in NFT. I'm going to now stop the sharing, the recording. So here we go.